Public hearing considering approval of a development agreement with Union Development Holdings, LLC, and issuance of multifamily residential revenue bonds.
Honorable Mayor, members of council, Troy Anderson, Assistant City Manager. Stand before you today with a request for approval of a development agreement that includes some terms and conditions associated with residential affordable housing project located in the WaterWalk redevelopment area. So a little bit of background history. Back in September 2002, City of Wichita entered into a development agreement to redevelop at that point in time the East Bank Redevelopment District, and more specifically what later became known as the WaterWalk development. There's a 20-year history involving the WaterWalk development, but bringing that to today, Union Development Holdings, LLC, you'll hear me refer to them as Union throughout, now proposes developing on city-owned land within the WaterWalk development, 186-unit multifamily affordable housing project. As part of the project, Union's requesting issuance of multifamily residential revenue bonds in an amount not to exceed $50 million to finance the project. Union estimates the total investment for the project to be just under $50 million and will include 1, 2, and 3 bedroom unit options along with amenities for the tenants. The project qualifies for a property tax abatement. In addition to the request for property tax abatement, Union has agreed to a 10-year pilot payment in lieu of taxes. The estimated value of the abatement for the first full year is approximately $107,000. With that being said, less the pilot of approximately $62,000, the net value of an abatement applicable to each of the jurisdictions is provided here on the screen in front of you. I won't read through those. Project is also eligible for a sales tax exemption. The approximate value of that sales tax exemption is about $1.8 million, with the city share being approximately $141,000. A cost-benefit analysis was performed, and the following ratio of benefits have been provided as a result of that cost-benefit analysis. Again, I won't read through those, but those are available to you in the report. So let's talk about the development agreement just a little bit. Approval of the development agreement will allow Union to proceed with, number one, applying to the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation for low-income housing tax credits to assist with funding the project. Number two, obtaining the development rights to the subject property. Number three, pursuing all other due diligence in commencing construction on the project. However, it withholds execution of the ground lease until such time as all of these preconditions are satisfied. Execution is conditioned upon adequate financing commitment, tax credit approvals, obtaining those development rights, and then successfully removing the property from the WaterWalk redevelopment project area in order to achieve the property tax abatement that's being requested. This is a snapshot of the history of public versus private investment in the WaterWalk development. I can answer any questions you might have on that. Down at the subtotal there shows kind of where we're at today and then what this might look like if council approves the development agreement today. Kind of a standard disclaimer, revenue bonds are a mechanism for achieving a sales tax exemption and a property tax abatement. The city's not lending any money. Owner developer is required to achieve all of its own financing. No taxpayer dollars are at risk. All costs are borne by the company requesting the use of the bonds. With that being said, if approved, Union agrees to pay all costs of issuing the bonds and agrees to pay the city's $2,500 annual origination fee. Law Department's reviewed the development agreement, has approved it as to form. Any of the bond documents that are required for the issuance of the bonds will be prepared by outside counsel, but ultimately Law Department will review and approve all of those in final form. The recommendation for today is to kind of hold a public hearing, but ultimately close a public hearing, approve the development agreement, authorize the necessary signatures. And with that being said, we do have representatives here from the applicant that would like to introduce themselves, and they have a few slides to share with you.
Good morning, Mayor Wu, Vice Mayor Johnston, Council Members Tuttle, Council Member Johnson, Council Member Glasscock, Council Member Ballard, and Council Member Hoheisel. Good morning. My name is Jim Korok. I am the co-trustee of the estate of the late Jack DeBoer. I am also president of Consolidated Development, a subsidiary of the estate, leading the WaterWalk development moving forward. As Troy mentioned, in September of 2002, Mayor Knight and the entire City Council, filled with iconic leaders and names you would recognize for sure, Brewer, Schlapp, Fury, Gray, Martz, and Lamke, approved a 99-year development agreement for the East Bank with local entrepreneur Jack DeBoer and his Riverwalk LLC, granting the exclusive rights to develop approximately 20 acres, now known as WaterWalk. As Troy mentioned, we're 23 years into that agreement with 76 years remaining. The vision for WaterWalk was big: a vibrant, mixed-use retail development office, entertainment, residential, retail, district revitalizing the Arkansas River East Bank, imagined as a central gathering place for Wichita, much like one may experience at Kansas City's Zona Rosa or Leewood's Town Center. The city invested significantly in infrastructure, parking, utilities, art, all laying the ground for something very special. But I think we can agree the reality after 23 years is less than what was hoped. WaterWalk features today include luxury condominiums, the Marriott Fairfield Inn and Suites, Realtors of South Central Kansas, and the offices of King of Freight, where sporting goods retailer Gander Mountain once stood. Significant efforts have been made throughout the years to develop a corporate headquarters, a luxury apartment building, an office building, and yes, even a casino, though none of those were ever realized. Looking back, Mayor, it's clear that WaterWalk has fallen painfully short of Jack's original vision. It would be easy to cast blame on external economic forces like the Great Recession or the pandemic. However, internal missteps and shifting priorities all played a role in the slow growth of WaterWalk. Perhaps the original vision focused too much on nice-to-haves like fine dining and upscale retail before establishing a critical mass of residents to support such a demand. Perhaps Gander Mountain's failure was an indicator, a bellwether of how retail development may have fared in WaterWalk. We'll really never know, but regardless, on behalf of the state, I sincerely apologize to the council, to the citizens of Wichita, for falling short of that original vision. We could and should have collaborated better, asked for help, and been more transparent. There's nothing we can do about the past. It's time to move forward. Today's proposed single development represents a level of investment almost equal to all private investment in WaterWalk since 2002. We all see the great things happening in downtown Wichita. Major investments like the Wichita Biomedical Campus, the Kansas College of Medicine, WSU Tech, and potentially Kansas's first dental school. Proper housing for those who work at our universities, hospitals, and keep the city running is essential. Wichita needs affordable housing for its workforce, its teachers, its technicians, its maintenance workers, and entry-level first responders, certified nurses, and more. Affordable, quality place to call home that doesn't consume the lion's share of one's paycheck. This project, this place, this time is where critical needs begin. Today should not be so much about airing grievances of the past, although we're ready to hear those, but more about dreaming about WaterWalk's future and the opportunity we have to dream and start fresh. My experience with the Annex Group for the past year has been outstanding. With 43 communities and over 6,300 units nationwide, Annex brings professionalism and attention to detail and experience. For example, when I insisted right from the get-go that the condo owners' river views remain protected, they listened and they adapted their design. I think city staff can attest to their responsiveness and high level of collaboration. After this development, what's next for WaterWalk? With over 300 potential new residents calling WaterWalk home, we begin to approach a critical mass needed to think seriously about restaurants, perhaps a grocery store, and even destination shopping, as this project takes up 1/3 of the remaining significant 2/3 of the WaterWalk development remaining. But first things must come first. It's time to make WaterWalk a catalyst for growth, a place the community can be proud of. We're committed to partnering with you, the city, to help WaterWalk and Wichita grow now and into the future. Mayor Wu and Council, your vote supporting the project today is a vote for the hard-working little guy who deserves to live in a vibrant, active, and beautiful committee and not be a victim of the past. Thank you for your time. I can stand for questions, or if you would like to hear from the developer first, up to you, Mayor.
Thanks, Jim. I actually have lots of questions, and I know that Assistant City Manager Troy Anderson also has some slides that go along with what you've just said, which you alluded to. Airing grievances is not this time, but I believe it is this time. We have never aired these grievances, and these grievances is the reason why this community has said they don't want to see sweetheart deals. This is the ultimate sweetheart deal. And I do want the community to know exactly what happened so that we can then move forward. But we cannot move forward without addressing what has been promised and not fulfilled. So I would like to ask Assistant City Manager Troy Anderson to provide the next set of slides, because I believe we need to address this portion before we can address future housing or development that continues to happen in that area. So I'm going to ask Assistant City Manager Troy Anderson to provide the next set of slides.
Okay, so as I indicated a little while ago, there's about 20 years of history here. All in all, I probably have about 50 slides. This is going to be in depth. There's a lot here to unpack. So again, if at any point in time there's questions, don't hesitate to interrupt. I'll try to go through this as quickly as possible, but with that being said, this really started even before 2002, started back in March of 1995. There was an agreement regarding development and operations of the East Bank Hyatt Regency Hotel and related improvements. A couple months later, in October 1995, there was a resolution considering establishment of a tax increment financing redevelopment district. In October, that set the public hearing for December of 1995, and in December of 1995, there was a public hearing, and ultimately there was established the WaterWalk Tax Increment Financing Redevelopment Project Plan. Eventually, that was deferred to March 25th. This is an illustration of the original East Bank Redevelopment District. You'll see how later this is revised. So then in September of 2001, city issues a request for proposals to develop the area south of Century 2 Convention Center, now known as the East Bank Redevelopment Project area. At the time, there was only one proposal received. The one proposal received was from a group of local developers, including Jack DeBoer, Dave Burke, Dave Wells, Greg Kossover. At that time, that group was known as Riverwalk LLC. The proposal submitted by the group was for a development of mixed-use project that included apartments, condominiums, a multi-story office building, retail shops and restaurants, all to be built around a public waterway. And in June of 2002, there was ultimately a reduction in those East Bank Redevelopment District boundaries. As you can see, it was reduced to sort of Douglas, Maine, Kellogg, and McLean. So then in July of 2002, there was an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, designating Riverwalk LLC as the preferred developer for the East Bank Redevelopment District. In August of 2002, there was a contract with a group, Gosson Livingston Associates, for preparation of the East Bank Master Plan. At that time, the proposal included about $65,000 in design fees, about $3,600 in reimbursable expenses. At the time, costs were supposed to be shared equally between Riverwalk LLC and the city. A month later, in September of 2002, a development agreement with Riverwalk LLC was drafted, presented to City Council, and approved as part of a master plan. The key elements of that initial development agreement included the following. There were public improvements that included acquisition of land, construction of a parking garage, a waterway, riverbank improvements, and at the time, a Wichita Street turnaround. Private investment was supposed to include development of 4 office buildings, over 250 units of high-end residential housing, retail, entertainment, and restaurants. At the time, it set forth a 99-year lease structure for the use of the land, with lease payments based on a profit-sharing formula. And additionally, there was a phased project approach to reduce public risk. Built-in private sector guarantees of $24 million as a condition of starting Phase 1A public improvements, and $9.6 million for Phase 1B. The developer was ultimately responsible for all outdoor maintenance, and that the city shared profits with the developer after the minimum rates of return were achieved. So I've taken that original sort of East Bank, or the revised, reduced East Bank Redevelopment District, zoomed in a little bit to the subject area. And as you can see here, former Maple Street kind of bisected the development. You can see there to the south, Phase 1A, to the north, Phase 1B. You can see the water feature that connects Phase 1A and 1B, and all of the proposed developments surrounding those water features, that water feature. So at the time, there was a pro forma that was put together that illustrated the public improvements and the private improvements. The cost of the East Bank public improvements at the time were estimated at about $30 million, excluding construction financing, for a combined total of about $33 million. At the time, private improvements were estimated at about $61 million for Phase 1A, and about $25 million for Phase 1B, for a combined total of about $86 million. When they first developed that pro forma, the revenues to help offset the public investment were identified as tax increment financing from that private development, totaling about $19.6 million. Some parking revenue estimated at about $3 million. At the time, there was an idea to submit an application for an EDA grant for about $1.5 million, and then ultimately programming within the capital improvement plan funds totaling about $8.9 million. So in February of 2003, there was a resolution considering adoption of the redevelopment project plan, set the public hearing for March 18th, 2003. In March of 2003, there was also an award and an agreement for the East Bank redevelopment design services. That was that Gosson and Associates again. So to design the redevelopment project plan was about a $1.46 million lump sum payment to that group. So then at the March 2003 public hearing, establishing the WaterWalk redevelopment project plan, the financial feasibility study examined the projected change in assessed valuation from the base year of 1995, which is when the redevelopment district was created, and that based on assumptions of full completion in 2009, the value at the base 1995 was about $4.6 million. Again, with the assumed capital investment on the private side, the appraised value in 2009 was supposed to achieve about $86–87 million. And with that being said, the analysis at that time said that there would have been sufficient property tax increment revenues, together with parking revenues, sufficient to retire the principal and interest on about $22 million general obligation bond issuance. Additionally, the balance of the project costs were, again, to be financed by general obligation bonds from general property tax revenues programmed within the capital improvement program. Additionally, the plan authorized about $31 million in TIF-eligible expenses. At that time, the vote was to defer to March 25th, but ultimately on March 25th, 2003, there was a motion and a second to close the public hearing and approve the project plan, and that motion failed by a vote of 4-3. At the time, there was an alternative funding source idea to use STAR bonds. So on March 25th, 2003, there was a resolution that a resolution be drafted in support of STAR bond for the WaterWalk redevelopment project plan. That motion carried 7-0. Additionally, on March 25th, 2003, there was another action item regarding the East Bank development agreement, and that was to divert Lewis Street traffic to Waterman and vacate Lewis Street. At the time, there was an indication that there was quote unquote no change to the development budget. So this kind of illustrates at that point in time, maybe one of the first revisions to the master plan. As you can see there, the idea was to vacate or abandon that section of Lewis Street, illustrated there in red, and to redirect traffic from Maple up to Waterman. So in April of 2003, again, now the actual resolution is put in front of City Council and voted on to support the use of STAR bonds for the WaterWalk plan. And later on in September of 2003, there's an approval of sort of the first comprehensive revised WaterWalk master plan and STAR bond area. The revised master plan incorporated a major destination retail facility based on the use of STAR bond financing and other changes. Subsequently, approval of the revised master plan was conditioned on subsequent approval by City Council of necessary changes to the development agreement. So just to kind of continue to paint the picture, we got two things going on, right? We got kind of the master plan and the concepts, but then there's also the development agreement for the terms and conditions and the obligations and roles and responsibilities of all the parties. So this was the revised master plan that was put forward. Again, I've kind of overlaid that over the subject property. You can kind of see how the plan has shifted and changed. There down in kind of the southern part of it, you see that large retail destination that was the impetus for pursuing STAR bond financing and funding at the time. Just a better perspective is kind of easier to see like this rather than overlaid. But some early illustrations of what that development was supposed to look like. And in December 2003, there were amendments to the WaterWalk agreement. This is known as the First Amendment to the WaterWalk Development Agreement. The amendments to the development agreement incorporated the details of the revised master plan that I just showed. Since the development agreement was first approved, the developer entity changed its name from Riverwalk LLC to WaterWalk LLC. The use of star bonds to finance public improvements related to the destination retail store added a new element not contemplated by the original development agreement. These new improvements add approximately $24 million to the cost to be paid by the city, with the sole source of funding identified as star bond proceeds. As you can see here, there was a revised table in that first amendment that talks about the public improvements, the private improvements, and those eligible expenses the star bond funding would be able to support. The revised cost of the East Bank public improvements are now estimated at about $28.8 million, excluding construction financing, for a revised total of about $30.9 or $31 million. There was about a $2 million reduction in public improvements. The way that it was suggested in the context of that conversation at the time was redirecting the waterway and making alternative waterway improvements was going to save the city about $2 million in public improvements. At that time, private improvements were additionally reduced from $86 million to about $82.266. So then in December 2003, there was a resolution considering adoption of a redevelopment TIF project plan. Remember, the previous plan failed. So this is now returning because in order to capture tax increment financing and the use of the star bonds, you have to have a project plan in place. So this is the resolution considering adoption of a redevelopment TIF project plan. That set the public hearing for January 27th, 2004. In the meantime, in December of 2003, there's an action item captured generally around the River Corridor project. The reason why we start introducing this into the conversation is because this is where the River Corridor project and the WaterWalk redevelopment begin to sort of blend sources and uses. You'll see why here in a little bit, but it was the expansion of the concept to include the River Corridor project for the use of the star bonds. Interestingly, within one of the staff reports for that December 30, 2003, it talks about how $1.9 million of that River Corridor project was going to be transferred to the East Bank WaterWalk development project. Okay, so then comes the public hearing. Not yet. January 2004, there is an amendment to the design service agreement with Goss and Livingston, increasing the contribution by another $71,000. This was for some survey, geotechnical, and topographical work. And then we get to the public hearing. January 27th, 2004, there's the public hearing establishing the WaterWalk tax increment financing redevelopment project plan. The financial feasibility study is revised and examines, again, the original 1995 base year, but pushes out the pro forma from 2009 to 2011. Again, assumed base year still maintains the $4.6 million of value, but based on a 2011 completion date, the appraised value is reduced from about $87 million to about $81 million. At the time, the analysis still showed that the stream of projected tax increment revenues, together with parking revenues, would be sufficient to retire the principal and interest on, at that point in time now, a $23 million general obligation tax increment bond over that same 15-year period. The balance of the project costs, again, would be financed by general obligation bonds from property tax revenues as identified in the capital improvement program. And the plan at that point in time, again, seeing that $2 million capital investment savings on the city side, only authorized $28.8 million in TIF eligible expenses. So then on February 3rd, there's a second reading adopting the WaterWalk redevelopment project plan and in addition to that, approving an EDA grant application. So as part of the WaterWalk redevelopment project financing, the budget included a $1.5 million EDA grant. Staff prepared a pre-application for the EDA funds totaling $3 million. So at that time, staff submitted an application for $3 million in actual EDA grant. The EDA funding will be used to pay a portion of the cost for constructing the waterway and/or street improvements within the project area. For what it's worth, and I think I hit on this later on, but that grant is not received. That grant is not awarded. So then in March of 2004, acquisition by eminent domain of tracts required for the WaterWalk project. So early on in the process, there's a suggestion that the city owns, operates, controls about 75% of the land within the redevelopment plan area, but an additional 25% of the land still needed to be acquired. So this is an action item by City Council at the time to exercise or potentially exercise eminent domain to acquire the remaining tracts. In June 2004, there's then a memorandum of agreement with the State Historic Preservation Office. Because of the use of star bonds and some other things, there's environmental and state historical studies and analyses that had to be conducted, and so that's part of that contract agreement. In September of 2004, star bonds for the WaterWalk project are beginning to be introduced into the conversation with City Council. At that point in time, there is an LOI letter of intent with a destination retailer, specifically Gander Mountain. At the time, the letter of intent calls for construction of about an 88,000 square foot multi-level mixed-use commercial building, including a lodge-style conference center, a mezzanine restaurant, a deck overlooking the river, a pedestrian bridge, and surface parking, together with other amenities. At the time, the estimated total development cost is a little more than $14 million. The request at the time was that the city contribute $7 million plus up to $1 million for additional public art, with about $7.1 million funded by WaterWalk LLC. However, and this is where I suggested earlier why the River Corridor project started to get introduced in the conversation. State law does not permit the use of star bonds to finance construction costs of privately owned or leased buildings. Under the developer's proposal, a portion of the building costs will be paid from the city's contribution, and then using its home rule powers, the city may, however, finance its contributions with general obligation bonds. General obligation funding is included in the approved capital improvement program for a nearby project that could be then used for this project. Upon approval of all of those statutory steps, star bonds would then be used to finance the eligible costs in that nearby CIP project. Again, staff identified the River Corridor project as those project eligible expenses eligible for star bond financing and compatible with the public improvements in the WaterWalk project. But in order to facilitate the arrangement, it was going to be necessary to amend the star bond area to include that River Corridor project. Staff planned to return to council on October of 2004 with development agreement revisions and an ordinance exempting the project from the city's bid law. It was recommended at the time that on November 2004 be set as the public hearing on the expansion of the East Bank redevelopment district to include the revised star bond area. You can see that expansion here on this illustration. So then in September 2004, another council action item for a WaterWalk area phase 2 environmental assessment. More specifically, on December 2004, WaterWalk development agreement amendment is introduced. This is known as the second amendment to the development agreement. Again, now the destination retail store has been introduced, and so that needed to be constructed. The suggestion at the time was that that be constructed on a design-build basis, using Key Construction as the design-build contractor. Key Construction was chosen as the design-build contractor in part because one of the owners is a partner in WaterWalk LLC. The budget for the STAR bond funding is being replaced by general obligation bond budget for the destination retail improvements totaling $14.1 million. The destination retail store being constructed on a design-build basis. Did I just duplicate that? Oh, my fault. That was a duplicate slide. I apologize. Okay, so then on October 2004, there's a second reading of that WaterWalk Development Agreement Amendment. We also amend the definitions of parking facilities in place of surface parking. So originally, the retail destination required all of this sort of free on surface parking, but because the site constraints wouldn't allow it, they had to go vertical with parking garage, and hence the amendment to the definition of parking facilities. December 2004, there's a memorandum agreement with State Historic Preservation Office. Again, continued efforts around compliance with those measures. December 2004, approval of a WaterWalk ground lease number 1 and related agreements. This is the first ground lease. So again, remember the original development agreement and proposal talked about a 99-year lease. And so the first project that really came up out of the ground, the destination retail, now needing its first sort of ground lease. This is referred to as ground lease number 1. Later on in January of 2005, there's a council action to approve a non-disturbance agreement. This is just in regards to some sort of legalese around depending on who defaults, right? That doesn't necessarily impact the tenant. And so there's a non-disturbance agreement that they would be allowed to continue to operate if for whatever reason the other party defaults. In March 2005, there is now one of the first construction contracts for street and utility improvements totaling about $638,000. These are the public improvements. Additionally, in May, there's a change order for those construction improvements. This is the first amendment to that, adds about another $38,000 to that street and utility work. In October 2005, there is an art consultant that is hired. Remember, there's a previous commitment to spend approximately $1 million on art, and so an art consultant is hired in October of 2005. In December of 2005, there is yet another revised site plan and supplemental agreement with Goss and Livingston for another $175,000. Really, this takes into consideration a lot of the previous conversations regarding Gander Mountain, regarding the parking facilities, the revised street layouts, replacing the WaterWalk Canal with water features that include programmable elements such as moving water, music lights, fire lasers, and deleting the footbridge over the river. This is the first time that water concept sort of evolves into more of a sort of theatrical water feature. And you begin to see that here in this illustration. So notice the previous water feature is now gone. This is really more, replicates that amphitheater and water you see there in front of Building C, the reorientation of some of the streets and the building pad sites, and then again, the retail destination there in the southwest. Okay, so then in June 2006, there is a HUD EDI special purpose grant that is applied for about $247,000. Again, the previous $3 million EDA grant was denied, was not approved. And so this is coming back to perhaps other grant opportunities available at the time and the pursuit of those. So then in June of 2006, there is also now another development agreement amendment. This is referred to as the third amendment. And again, just now continues to memorialize the conversations and actions that have been taking place up until now. The new site plan, so the location of Building C, parking structure, the location of the amphitheater. Again, that's the part of the site plan that has been replaced. Or that has replaced the water feature. Amendments to coincide with the revised master plan, deletes the waterway improvements, deletes the bridge, and updates the public improvement budget. So here's the public and private improvement budget that is included in the Third Amendment. The revised cost of the public improvements are now estimated at about 29.8 or $30 million, excluding construction financing. Again, now we start to introduce the $7 million towards the destination retail improvements, the $1 million towards art. So now the public improvements are in the ballpark of about 39.9 or $40 million. Private improvements are again reduced, this time from about 82.25 to about $80 million. So then in August 2006, there's a WaterWalk Capital Contribution and Construction Fund Agreement. Council action on June of 2006 to approve the Third Amendment allowed for the commitment of funds to construct the amphitheater and the parking garage. However, it didn't include the actual agreement documents, so that had to get brought back. It was just kind of a formality at that point in time to finalize that and authorize the necessary signatures. In September of 2006, there's a plat of the WaterWalk Phase 2 edition. So then we get into December 2006, is where we introduce ground lease number 2. This is with WaterWalk LLC to construct the 4-story mixed-use building, which will include retail, commercial, and residential condominiums and a structured parking. So this is that building C there on the far east side of the redevelopment area. December, approval of a WaterWalk ground lease number 3 and related documents. So at the same time, there's also conversation commitments to build the Wichita Area Association of Realtors building. It's about a 12,000 square foot office building. So we now have ground leases number 2 and 3. Additionally, in February of 2007, that EDI grant is approved. And so there's a council action item to accept that EDI grant for about $247,000. Okay, so then in May of 2007, there's a star bond for River District redevelopment project. This is a resolution setting the public hearing for July 10th. On July 10th is now the public hearing. The total not to exceed amount of improvements that can be funded with star bonds has been revised to now be sort of capped out at $13 million based on the feasibility study and the project plan. The total cost of the entire River District redevelopment project is about $155.8 million, with 87 from private and 68.8 from public, which now includes the star bond funded improvements. Again, that includes that $1.9 million transfer from the River Corridor project to the East Bank WaterWalk development project. So then it was suggested at the time that within the condominium owners and owners, that they were some users that were unable to obtain financing in the state of Kansas. And so there was a suggestion that title of that land needed to be transferred to WaterWalk LLC in order for those condominium owners to obtain financing on the condominium units. So building C, which includes a 490 car parking structure, 48 residential condominium units, and 12,000 square feet of office space, 16,000 square feet of retail space, is transferred in title. There's a number of residential condo units that have been contracted for, so they've been unable to obtain that first mortgage financing. And so at this point in time, the city transfers title of the ground over to WaterWalk LLC. So this building is not part of that 99-year lease structure at that point. Again, there's no residential condominiums in the state of Kansas that can serve as comps. They say the reason why is the residential condo properties in Kansas are located on land owned by a condo association, not on leased land. Bank's been unwilling. Developer has asked the city to replace the ground lease with the first right of refusal to repurchase the property for $1, and the property is transferred.
Okay, can we go back to 84, Mayor? Is that okay?
Right here?
Yeah, 84.
84.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Okay, so does this mean that the city no longer owns this plot of land?
That's correct.
So it was a plot of land we leased out for $1, and then now they outright own it
That's correct.
Did they purchase it, or did we just give it to them?
It was transferred based on the first right of refusal to repurchase. If the uses ever change, then the city has the right to repurchase it for $1. But so long as it continues to function as it was constructed, then the transfer was approved.
Okay, now I have some plans pertaining to that in this current contract. I'll save it for when we get to that part.
Sure. Yep.
I have one follow-up question to this very specific topic. I did not understand that 99-year lease did not apply to the WaterWalk condominiums. However, there's public parking on there right now, so how does that work?
So let me answer the first part of that, just to kind of frame the conversation. In 2002, right, that original development agreement set forth a 99-year development structure, right? It wasn't until the land was leased as part of a ground lease did the actual tenant gain the rights to occupy that specific ground. So you've heard me talk about the various ground leases. Right now we've included ground lease 1, 2, and 3. Any of the land that isn't under a ground lease is still owned, operated, and controlled sort of by the city, even to today, okay? What that original development agreement gave the developers were the development rights. So once the developers wanted to exercise their rights and develop on that city-owned land, then that's why all of these sort of amended plans and amendments to the development agreements to then now include those ground leases for what should have been at the time the remaining term of that 99-year lease. Does that make sense? So that's the first part of your question. The second part of your question is, so the garage was built. The garage is a private parking garage as part of some of the original agreements, perhaps amendments there too. There's a requirement that a percentage of those spaces within that parking garage be made available to the public. That's how they were able to use sort of public dollars to finance construction of the project by making sure that a certain percentage of that parking was sort of continually made available to the public. But it is a private garage, sort of owned, operated, controlled by private entity, right? It's only a percentage of that parking that has to be made available to the public. Okay,
And we do not maintain that parking garage then?
that's correct.
And one more question, because I know we've been talking about parking downtown.
Yep.
Will this be considered at all as part of, there are spaces that are public spaces that are available, and what's that percentage from the, I don't even remember how many stalls there are, but
Yeah.
what's the actual percentage of public stalls?
I want to say the number that stands out in my mind is they have to make 250 spaces of what I believe is about a 450 to 500 space garage. They have to make 250 spaces available to the public. So about half. But I can get you that exact information. I don't have that information available with me today, but we have closely monitored.
Will that be accounted for when we talk about public parking, as we're talking about downtown parking? Separate conversation, but this is one of those lots that has public stalls.
Yeah, so it has been included in some of our illustrations on the Park Wichita website. We have a couple of illustrations on the, it is identified as one of those, and there's a couple of others that there are private parking garages or there are agreements that those private property owners must provide a certain number or a certain percentage of public parking. This is one of those, and it is included in the illustration on the Park Wichita website. Okay, so then in January of '08, just making sure I didn't miss anything. January of '08, City Council authorizes a construction contract for some pavement and sidewalk work out in front of Building C. It's about $500,000. Then there is a change order to that sort of pavement sidewalk work in August of '08, just under $20,000. So then comes December of 2008, and there is yet another WaterWalk Master Plan funding and document amendment. This is referred to as the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment proposes yet another revision of the master plan. This time now we're simply eliminating the amphitheater and replacing it with a landscape area with a water feature and a gazebo, which can then serve as the focus of an outdoor entertainment venue, and moves the Waltzing Waters Fountain to a new location. As a result, the Fourth Amendment revises the city budget for public improvements, increasing the contribution for the parking structure by about 1.5 million to a total of 8.5 million, and increases the public improvements generally by about 2.6 million to a total of 6.1 million, just in those two changes to the master plan. So then in December of 2008, there's a contract amendment for architectural and engineering services, again with Goss and Livingston. It's estimated at about $643,000 at the time. Again, December of '08, there's a contract amendment for an art consultant with Gredeman Group. They were the respondents to that RFP for an art broker. In September of '09, there's a WaterWalk revised master plan, funding and document amendments. This one really revolves around the boathouse and the Kansas Sports Hall of Fame, although there are revisions to site improvement areas 1, 2, and 3, and you can really kind of see those in sort of this revised master plan. Area 1 being that area between Main Street and Water Street. Area 2 being those improvements between Water Street and I think that's called Wichita Street now. And then Area 3 is those improvements between Wichita Street and the river. Again, WaterWalk revised master plan funding and document amendments from September 1. The total budget for the WaterWalk public improvements is now north of $41 million. Consists of general obligation bond dollars of a little more than 19 million, tax increment financing of about 17.6 million, special obligation star bonds about 4.3 million, and a federal EDI grant of about 247,000. In October 2009, there is a boathouse lease. In January of 2010, there's now a letter of intent relating to development of WaterWalk Hotel. There's a tentative agreement with 4G LLC, wholly owned by Jim Corrick, to include one, a cash contribution, which was in the form of issuance of general obligation bonds that were intended to be repaid by transient gas tax revenues. That totaled about $2.5 million. At the time, there was also approval of a community improvement district, CID, 2% sales tax. The value of that's undetermined. There was no information available in the staff report. Additionally, there was an issuance of a letter of intent to issue industrial revenue bonds for a sales tax exemption, valued at about $328,000, and an approval of a 99-year ground lease for $1 a year plus additional rent, and approve a parking agreement.
I want to stay on that slide. Yes, I think we have a couple of questions. So how much was this hotel? And the city paid $2.5 million for this development, this specific hotel. Can you explain that?
The staff report at the time suggests it's about a $12 million project. And yes, the agreement would have and did contribute $2.5 million. The city sold general obligation bonds to help finance the project, and then they have since been using transient gas tax revenues to sort of reimburse that bond debt.
Maybe I'll ask that question to city manager. Can you explain that? How did the city get into giving a cash contribution to a private development project specifically that already had, at this point, I think slide number 92 had hundreds of, or tens of millions of dollars that had already been invested by the public.
Right.
I'd like to know, because this was January of 2010, You were city manager at that
It
time,
was,
is that
yes.
correct?
Right. At that time, Mr. Korak came forward and said that had proposed the hotel, and the council wanted to see some development because there hadn't been much development other than the condos and Gander Mountain at the time. And so the problem was that we were at the depth of the recession, and there was a significant project gap. So I believe Mr. Korak proposed that there be a repayment of debt for the project through transient guest tax, which is allowed under state code, subject to a reverse referendum. So if a petition is filed by residents, then that would go up for election before it could be ratified. So the council agreed, recognized that we were in unique circumstances and they wanted to move forward with the project, and so they agreed to the $2.5 million contribution.
You used specific language when you were talking that you said that it was intended to be repaid. Is the full amount, has it been repaid? Or is just the intent still 15 years later?
I don't know, and that's why I didn't have a chance in sort of just gathering all of this information. I haven't had a chance to really sit down with our finance department and figure out exactly where we're at. So if you go back to kind of this slide, right, all of those general obligation bonds, where we at on the tax increment financing, where we at on the STAR bonds, et cetera. I haven't had a chance to sit down with our finance director and figure out exactly where we're at on all of these. This is really just kind of painting the history of the council action items as they relate to WaterWalk.
Well, for
That would
only
be kind
being
of the
here
next-
3 years, you've done a great job of going back 20 plus years with all this research. Thank you.
And a quick question, sorry.
Yeah.
Do we have any other 99-year leases anywhere in the city?
I don't know for certain. I'm going to guess we probably do. It's not uncommon. It's not uncommon, right? Cities do these 99-year leases for a host of reasons. So whether we actually do or not, I'd have to go do some due diligence. But if we had one, it wouldn't surprise me. It's somewhat, it's not incredibly common, but it is done within.
Bob, do you know if we have any?
I can't think of any, and I can't think of any since I've been here, other than what was approved here.
Thank you.
I have one quick question here as well. At the very beginning, like 40 slides ago, don't have to go there, but it talks about the 24 million guaranteed and private spending on this whole project as well.
Yep.
Was that 24 million realized in the way that we had anticipated at the beginning?
I have a slide, kind of one of the last slides I have shows that kind of where we're at. And we showed it a little bit earlier in my previous slide deck that showed the public and private investment up to date, kind of subtotals that. And then, so maybe that answers your question about the original 24 million, because I'd have to kind of go back and kind of say, we know exactly what was realized, but just being able to compare that to the original uses, I'd have to kind of go back and just make sure. I know some of the things like the condominiums were realized, the apartments were realized. Trying to think, there's not really any retail out there. There is some office, that was part of some of the original, so some of it, I don't know if
So
that
mixed
answers.
bag.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to try and save all my other questions to the end, but just going back to the intended to be repaid, I know that you don't have that answer.
Yes.
Mr. Cork, do you have that answer? I imagine that you may be aware of it if our finance department hasn't pulled that information yet. Has that been repaid back, and has the city been made whole?
I don't have the specific answer on that, council member. There's a lot more to this story. I would say just was doing it, the simple math. So this is a hotel that, again, but for the development of the hotel, was 0%, there was zero property tax being paid. Since it opened in 2010, 2011, it's paid over $3 million in property tax. Again, would have been a goose egg, zero. If you do the basic math, and by the way, it's the transient guest tax, not the transient gas tax, has been represented so far. If you do the basic math, which I think is at 6%, is the transient guest tax. Who would know? Roughly?
Yes.
Okay, so do the basic math on that. 15 years of operation, roughly $3 to $4 million a year in revenue. That would, again, back a napkin, roughly $45 million is generated in that time. Take 6%. The way I do that is I take 10% because I'm not real smart. So that's $4.5 million over that $45 million. So half of that is about that, since that amount of time. Again, that is very rudimentary, very back napkin. There's a lot more to the story than what you've heard so far, certainly. But that's how I would generally answer your question, Councilman.
Thank you.
Yes, and thanks for bringing that up. Yes, the slide says transient, it is transient guest tax, so I appreciate that, thank you. Okay, so for whatever it's worth, at the January 2010 meeting, that's deferred to February 2nd. Ultimately, February 2nd, that letter of intent relating to the development of WaterWalk Hotel is approved by City Council. In April of 2010, there are ordinances authorizing the use of transient guest tax revenues to finance the WaterWalk Hotel project. In June of 2010, there's an extension of that IRB letter of intent and approval of the hotel development agreement, subsequent ground lease, and related documents. Ultimately then, in August of 2010, there are amendments to the WaterWalk development agreement, at this point in time known as the Fifth Amendment. These are now the WaterWalk apartments on the other side of the river, and the acquisition of a floating stage to serve as the future amphitheater. And in May of 2013, there's the ultimate approval of the floating stage on the Arkansas River. That was that EDI grant for about $247,000. There were some additional funds that were contributed out of the budget for a canopy on that floating stage, but that's where that EDI grant went. In May of 2019, there was approving an amendment to the WaterWalk ground lease number 1 with King of Freight. So at this point in time, Gander Mountain is no.
Sorry, Troy. I think Councilmember Hoheisel had a question for the
Sorry.
previous slide.
No, after, just after.
So at this point in time, there's now sort of this transition. Gander Mountain is, and I don't know exactly when Gander Mountain sort of goes out of business, but there's this transition to King of Freight, LLC. And so there's a separation in that initial ground lease number 1 to now be sort of ground lease 1A and 1B. Ultimately, that was deferred to May 21st of 2019. Ultimately, in 2019, there's an approval of the amendment to that ground lease, and that is approved.
I have a question regarding that specific slide. So does that mean, well, I guess we're talking about King of Freight.
Yes.
Do they have also, are they under the 99-year lease agreement?
They basically assumed the previous terms and conditions of the ground lease. So the amendment, there's some area adjacent to the building that was part of the original ground lease number 1. So this kind of separated that out into ground lease 1A and 1B. But for all intents and purposes, King of Freight assumed the balance or all of the remaining terms and conditions of the initial ground lease number 1.
Do we have an amount of what was paid for by King of Freight to purchase this?
I do not have that information, no.
I can get it.
Okay.
We'll continue.
So then in November of 2019, there's a public hearing considering a reduction in the East Bank redevelopment district and an expansion of the West Bank redevelopment district. There's a resolution setting a public hearing. Ultimately, in December, there is a public hearing. More specifically, we start transitioning across the river, so we're getting sort of away from WaterWalk. We're now talking about the ballpark and some of the West Bank development, right? So you see the area highlighted there in yellow, or excuse me, highlighted there in red. The area between McLean and the river was originally included in the East Bank redevelopment district, so it had to be removed from the East Bank redevelopment district and added to the West Bank redevelopment district. And so that's what these council action items are about here, sort of December 2019. So this kind of goes back to Councilman Hoheisel's question, right? So we went back and we kind of built upon the information that was provided really from about that 2010, where we identified the $41 million in public investment, and based on information provided to us by the WaterWalk trustee. We haven't had a chance to go do a deep dive into the private sector investments, but just high-level snapshot at this point in time, the public has invested a total of about $43.8 million, and the private sector investment has invested about $36.5 million. And with that being said, I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Troy. And I do want to just make mention, you just got into your role how long ago?
I got here in 22, so I've been here for about 3 years now.
As Councilmember Glasscock said, thank you for digging up a lot of this information that, again, has spanned over 20 years. And I appreciate that we now have it on the record, and I wanted it on the record because I believe that's what the public deserves. And so I appreciate that it was detailed, and I know that there are multiple items that you still have more information to provide. I know some people have mentioned that there were some clerical errors, including whether it was transient versus gas or 2003 versus 2023. Just wanted to make mention that you tried to pull this all together in the last week, and I asked for this specific information. I've been asking actually this very information since I got into office last year, because I believe that the public deserves to know what has happened and why they believe that there are things that don't currently happen on this council. We scrutinize, we question, because we are trying to do our best in speaking on the behalf of the public. And so I'm not going to speak on the behalf of individuals prior to me. I can only speak for myself, and I just want to say thank you for being transparent on the information. It is very sad seeing the very last slide before this questions and showing how much public dollars has been invested into this property, and how much in private dollars have been invested into this. And still, there are many promises that were made that were not fulfilled. And so to me, it was important to have the community see all this information, and it is on record. It's in the minutes. It's also in this video through YouTube. So I appreciate all this information from the past. Councilmember Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mayor. Plenty of questions. I'm going to jump all around here. Was this property ever part of a CID? We indicate that there were a number of them kind of around there, and there's not.
The only property that's included in a CID is the hotel.
The hotel?
The rest of the land was not included in a CID.
Okay, so, and just this general overall question, you indicated if this LIHTC application fails and then all of this goes away.
Correct.
Okay. What happens if the pilot isn't paid?
Then,
The pilot funding.
yeah, arguably, they'd be in default of the ground lease at that point in time, because that really sort of won't get addressed until we get into the ground lease, which there's been some questions about the ground lease. And we've had these conversations with the applicant, right, that there are a number of revisions that are going to need to be made to the ground lease. And so that ground lease is going to have to come back in front of City Council at some point, if council approves it today, if they obtain the tax credits, if they obtain the development rights, because we don't know who the lender is going to be or lien holder is going to be. We don't know who the investor is going to be. And so in order to fill in those blanks, ultimately that ground lease will most likely have to come back to City Council anyway. And at that point in time, we can sort of talk about some of the other terms and conditions associated with that ground lease.
Would you anticipate any major revisions to the ground lease?
So in some of our conversations, some of the back and forth with some of the attorneys representing the developer, there was some language that they wanted added to that ground lease based on some assumptions or some presumptions of what the lien holder would want as far as kind of mitigating their risk and sort of their liability. And so in conversation with them, we've said we're going to sort of reject your revisions to the ground lease at this point in time, because the suggestion was even they didn't necessarily know what terms and conditions the lien holder, the lender, the investors might want to see in that ground lease. And so we said, well, until such time as sort of you get to that point where you know who an investor might be, you know who a lien holder might be, and they want to make revisions to that ground lease, does it really make sense for us to kind of, so we rejected all of their revisions in order to continue to try to protect the interest and risk and liability of the city.
So what would happen if there's a ground lease that comes before council and we reject it?
Then the project would die.
The project would die, okay. If we can go to the contract, I don't know if you have a copy with you. Under Exhibit D, Section 2B.
Exhibit
D.
the estoppel.
D.
D as in dog.
Dog, yes, sir.
I'm looking at the form of lease or estoppel certificate.
Form of IRB, letter of intent.
Oh, the other. Okay. Section 2B.
Yep, a provision regarding the tenant's option to purchase the project that states a firm option price and the obligation of the tenant to provide for payment of all other expenses related to the exercise of such option to purchase. So what all would be eligible for the tenant to purchase for the project? Is it simply the infrastructure, or does that include
The building.
the building, and that's it?
Correct.
So so that does not include the ground as well?
I'm sorry, I
The
didn't.
plot?
In the parking lot, yes, there would be some private improvements that they would be able to buy, the parking lot, but generally the building and the parking lot, those improvements that they made to the ground would be eligible for the tenant to purchase.
But not the actual ground itself?
Correct. The underlying ground lease is that 99, well, at this point in time, 76-year ground lease on the remaining ground. Yes.
Is there anything in here that gives them an option to purchase the ground?
No.
No? Okay. All right, now go to Exhibit D 15E. And this talks about the event the tenant moves, business operations, or ceases operation within Wichita within 5 years, that the city will be made whole for the property taxes abated. Is that all that pertains to, is just that they cease operation?
Right, so, yes, because in this, there's no jobs that are required, they're not using job creation, right, as a tax. So if we did do a 5-year review, right, for all intents, they would have made the initial capital investment. We'll know that when the bonds are issued, we'll know that they satisfied their sort of capital investment. We would only really do the 5-year review. We'll do the 5-year, but the 5-year review is really only if, are they there? Are they continuing to exist there and operate? Did they satisfy the jobs? But in this case, there's no job requirements. So it's pretty standard language that we put into all of our letter of intents, just depending on whether or not the commitments that were made, whether they include job creation or whether they're still in operation, et cetera.
And if they decide to sell to somebody else, that will transfer, the contract transfers over?
Yeah, there's a whole host of rules and regulations because it's a low-income housing tax credit project, right? There's a whole host of requirements that there's sort of 15-year obligations on the property and on the use of the property. They might change operators, right? But for all intents and purposes, if they obtain the LIHTC credits and if they build the project, there's a pretty long-standing runway that they'll continue to operate for at least the 15 years.
Okay, I have another question about foreclosure. Okay, what happens if there is a foreclosure on here? I look at section 1003. It's a little further out. So if there is a foreclosure, it goes to the bank essentially.
Correct,
And they would be held to the same standards that we're laying out here.
correct.
So all it would be was simply the bank owns the property now, but they are still obligated to stick to the same contract.
Absolutely. And again, because it would be a low-income housing tax credit project, right, the continued performance of that, now I have tenants, and I'm dealing with sort of state and federal government. There's going to be a whole host of oversight on this project that, yes, the lien holder would ultimately be responsible to make sure that that continues, because there's a whole lot more riding on it probably than just even the incentives that are being offered by the city at this point.
Okay, are there any personal guarantees on this project?
There are no personal guarantees. Again, we're kind of coming at this from the perspective of it's entirely performance-based, right? The property tax payment is short of the pilot, but we'll address that pilot payment as part of the ground lease, right? And then as part of the ground lease, then there will be default provisions that will be addressed as part of the ground lease for if that payment in lieu of taxes is not paid.
Could you talk about some of those clawbacks, I guess you would call them?
Really, it's a default of sort of the ground lease, right? And so the default provisions generally start talking about things like termination of the ground lease, so on and so forth, which lien holders at that point in time get involved pretty quickly.
We send them a letter and then they got 30 days to cure.
Yep.
Okay. Parking, I know there's some consternation around parking.
Yep.
How many spots are they planning on having out there?
So they are providing about 70 spaces on site. And then ultimately at that point in time, tenants would then, if tenants are unable to secure parking within the 70 spaces that are planned for construction by the developer tenant, then they would need to seek parking elsewhere, whether that be in a public parking garage, lot, on street, or in a private sort of condominium owners association parking structure. At that point in time, anybody else beyond those 70 would need to find some other parking solution.
Okay, 2 questions for the developer real quick.
Ryan Clark, Senior Vice President of Development with the Annex Group.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Have any other projects been brought to you for this plot of land here recently?
Any other projects? No. You mean somebody else trying to develop on this site?
Yes.
No.
That's actually a question for Mr.
Yeah,
Korak.
I guess I'm not the owner.
Okay, I apologize, Mr. Korak, yeah. Yeah, if you,
Council member, no, nothing specific. Of, again, the 3, what I would call significant lots remaining at WaterWalk, this is, of course, we've already negotiated our deal, but the least desirable of the 3. We have had interest in the other 2 lots in particular, but wanted to hold off on any further discussion with that until we had the opportunity to fully present this project and vet this project.
okay. Yeah, that's actually it for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll have a follow-up question since the 2 of you are already up here. I apologize, council members, but I know that you still have some slides to provide regarding the project itself. I know that this was very lengthy. We talked about WaterWalk, and I think a lot of council members have some questions regarding WaterWalk in general. And I know that we're currently speaking about the project, the new affordable housing project. However, since you're already up here, I do want to ask one specific question. According to the documents we received, and Jim, you could stay up here too, the total is $49 million, is that correct, the project?
That's correct, yes.
The hard cost is $32 million, is that correct?
Yeah, that should be correct.
So there's a $17 million gap. So I would assume soft costs are about $3 to $5 million or so. What's the gap of 12 to 14 million? Where does that money go?
Yeah, I mean, it's all included in soft cost, financing fees, all the other different items that are pertain to a development. It's typical for a project like this to have about 30% be in soft costs.
The reason why I asked is I want to know, what is WaterWalk getting out of this then? Do they get a development fee? If so, what is that number?
Sure.
Mayor, again, back to the basics of how this development agreement was initially ratified in 2002. The way that this land works is that the DeBoer estate has the development rights, has been explained to all of this land. They also have the right to sell the development rights to the land as well too. So that is what happened here. That's what's happened in other developments as well too, is the development rights of this, the leasehold rights specifically, are being sold to the annex group.
What is the dollar amount?
I am not going to share that. That's a private transaction and not going to share that.
The reason why I asked even more specifically that number is because I'm looking at the slide right now that is up on the screen, which shows $43 million in public dollars invested into this property. So I want to know specifically, what is WaterWalk getting out of this in terms of dollars?
Again, WaterWalk is receiving, as I explained, the leasehold, transferring the leasehold rights, and they are being paid a fee to transfer those leasehold rights.
You will not disclose that fee, correct?
I won't today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Glasscock.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a lot of questions. I walked in with a few and I walked out with a lot more. First, I'm also engaging probably more upset on behalf of taxpayers over the past 20 years and all the failures that this development project has put on taxpayers. We talk a lot about the city. The public investment is taxpayer investment in this. It isn't just city tax dollars. It is tax dollars from citizens that have been invested in this project, and I think everybody should be mad about it. So going back to some of the specifics of this, Troy, question for you. How do we get out of a 99-year lease?
So I think what you're ultimately asking is the terms and conditions associated with the development agreement, right? There's probably a couple of different scenarios, right? One scenario, man, I don't even know if I want to throw this out there, right? But one scenario might be to buy them out, right? One option would be to buy out the developer and buy out the development rights. I would hate to even suggest that, right, given the investment that's already been made, but that could be an option. There's not really, we've done through, our law department has.
Mayor. At the request of the mayor, I've had some conversations with Mr. Korak on behalf of the estate, and we have contemplated the possibility of a fee simple title for a defined period of time. So there'd no longer be a lease. They would own the property for a defined period of time. And if they don't develop during that period of time, the property would revert back to the city. So we would then have full control of the property.
Okay.
That's a concept that we've talked about. We've frankly waiting for this project to determine where it's going before we decide how we to go forward.
So were there no clawbacks?
I don't know if the mayor wants to talk more about that.
So the very question that has been raised is, this deal was cut 20 plus years ago. And the question that I think Councilmember Glasscock wanted to ask next is the very question I've asked from the very get-go. Were there no clawbacks in that agreement back 20 plus years ago?
No, we've spent a lot of time, law department scouring through the development agreements and the amendments to the development agreements. Yeah, short of a really lengthy, and again, not even sure what the successors might be, right, of a lawsuit to There might be some, we've suggested maybe there's some opportunity to kind of daylight some other things about some performance of having to bring back redevelopment plans and those things, periodic studies and those kind of things. Really, really probably low success rate options. For all intents and purposes, it is what it is. I mean, there's short of renegotiating the terms and conditions of the development agreement, unfortunately, we're kind of bound by the terms and conditions that exist today.
Which is what I have been upset about since the get-go. So again, this was 20 plus years ago. None of these individuals on this council were there during that time. And when this deal was cut, which is the reason why the community says sweetheart deals in particular, is because of this very thing. And so, because there are no outs, there were no great ways to negotiate on the behalf of the citizens of Wichita, we just let the developers deal and say, this is what we're gonna give you, and we said yes back then. That is not how we play here in the city of Wichita now. So my question then to the city manager has been, what can we do now, moving forward? This has already been an agreement, it's been signed, it's had 20 plus years elapsed, but it still has 70 plus years remaining. What can we do to cut that amount of time so that something does get developed there without further public investment? So that's when I asked the city manager, what are other opportunities to move forward? So can you explain the fee simple title and what could be negotiated to reduce that from 70 plus years to something more reasonable and that we can move forward with actual development?
Well, the concept would be that the title would be conveyed to the developer. We'd have to determine the terms for that. And then what we had just originally talked about and not been committed to at all by the developer is that it could be possibly a 15-year period. And if that's the case, that if nothing is developed or it's not fully developed in 15 years, then it would come back to us. But that was an initial concept, not bringing something to you today to review, but that's giving you just a context or an idea of how we could restructure this.
I would like to know from Jim, what is WaterWalk willing to give up to make this project happen, which is affordable housing?
Yeah, I'm delighted to have this conversation, Mayor. Thank you. And I would maybe look at it a little differently and give you a little more context. As Troy mentioned in his one of his slides several slides ago, even the condo owners, who many of them are here today, back when they were buying their condos, you remember that conversation that they had trouble getting financing? And so therefore the building ultimately went under fee simple, essentially, ownership. Because what happens in that situation is just like we have our own homes, what if you went to the bank and as part of your collateral, all you had was the improvements above the ground and the ground wasn't part of that, okay? So besides just some laws that took significant collateral away from the financial institutions to finance those projects, which was a big reason that went to fee simple on this particular project. That same thing holds true, and to be very direct and honest with you, the clock is ticking. So 99 years originally, 76 years left right now. We will, without, again, being very honest, significant public economic help on this project, it will be difficult to continue to move forward in a structure, financial structures like the Annex Group is agreeing to do today. And what I mean by that is at some point, whoever's loaning the money to a significant development is going to get left holding the bag on the lease, right? And so at that point, they know that that lease, it's not collateral today, and at some point, I believe the way that this is all written is all the improvements. So as an example, the Fairfield, we've talked a lot about that today. At the end of that 99-year lease, all of the improvements above ground on that ground that the city owns reverts back to the city. So it becomes very difficult to get financing and have those financing conversations. And it's very complicated for the banks to go through. We have had developers come to us, and when they realize, oh, this is a land lease deal, never mind, we've got other places that we can go fee simple. So what this potential proposal allows, frankly, is it allows us as a developer to have a lot more opportunities to be able to seek development on this ground. It opens up the possibility, just possibility, of single-family homes as an example. I mean, imagine going and trying to get a mortgage on a single-family townhome, row home, something like that you own and you don't own the ground underneath it. It's a very difficult conversation with the bank, and then the bank says, oh, I'm happy to learn more. Tell me about this land lease situation. And guess what? Troy's got to come up with 50 slides. I mean, it's very complicated, and the bank will say, there are other people we'd rather be working with or do something else. So, to answer your question, partially anyways, we are open to that conversation of moving into a fee simple environment where we believe we can more aggressively market and develop the WaterWalk area and significantly bring that time frame down. And at the end of the day, if we don't get it done, then it reverts back to the city. We're open to that conversation. A lot of details involved in that, but we're absolutely open to that conversation.
I have one quick question to the city manager. If we did this in contingent, and be it contingent upon an actual deal that would reduce the 76-year land lease right now, because I feel like these are two separate conversations. We have a housing development that is asking for approval, and then we also have this land lease that the city entered into 20 plus years ago, and I'm concerned about this portion, making sure that this gets negotiated prior to saying yes or no to a housing development. So I'd like to know what type of time frame do we have? I know that the developers that are wanting to develop affordable housing also have a deadline, and I'd like to know what that deadline is in order to apply for LIHTC credit from the state. So I know that this is all rushed, which I don't like, but I want to know what are our options when it comes to what he's saying. Well, we're open to it. Well, we also have another opportunity right now, which is affordable housing. So can you explain to us what truly are our options where we do get the better deal for the citizens of Wichita, but not get time locked because of an application deadline?
I think you're right to say that there's two separate actions that are involved. I'll let the developer talk about the time frame, but I think they have a very tight deadline. I think it's this week they have to file their LIHTC application. And so when I've had my preliminary conversations with Jim, we have talked about for the remaining 2/3 of property. They've already built in a 76-year lease into their project. And it's how we go forward on the remaining properties. And making sure that you're also comfortable with the land lease. If they do get the credits, that you're comfortable with the land lease provisions before we finalize those and they conclude their project.
Yeah, so the project with KHRC in terms of the deadline, so they have 2 application rounds every year. So one was in February and another one is in August. So why it's significant is those are the only 2 times you can apply, but Kansas has the Kansas Housing State Tax Credit, which was just been sunset. So this is the last round that they'll ever have this. So the financial feasibility totally, relies on getting that additional state credit that KHRC provides, and this is the past round. This was the same award that we received for the Purple Heart Trail project on the east side of town. So, yeah, without being in on this application, the feasibility would go away.
Ryan, I know you still have some slides
Sure.
to provide. What I'd like, I still see some questions from council members. I believe it's regarding the WaterWalk agreement. Do you mind holding on a little
Sure.
bit longer?
Yep.
Because there are 2 separate conversations happening right now, and WaterWalk, I think there's still more questions. Vice Mayor Johnston.
Thank you, Mayor. Troy, thank you very much for doing all this work. I have a history on the front end of this before this happened, and it kind of brings up an old wound that I am long over. But I would like to say it just for maybe lessons in the future. In the spring of 2001, I went to Council District 1's representative. I think it was Councilmember Fury, I think, downtown 6. I don't know who it was a lady. Went with her, went to lunch with her and told her of some plans that I had for moving Johnston's. I'd bought Johnston's in 1995, had a 10-year payout to my father, trying to make plans for the future. So I went to her and I said, listen, I'd like to move the store into more of a central location because our business came from about a third out west, 2/3 out east. And I thought a central location would be good. So I went to her, told her our plans. I had Tim Johnson from the Better Book Room, who was a thriving Christian bookstore at that time, also interested in the area. Wanted to move his store from Maine down to more of a central area. And she was told by me that the city council wanted to create a district similar to San Antonio's Riverwalk. They want to have a Riverwalk like San Antonio has, and they have a developer that will do that. Would not tell me the name of the developer. I learned later it was Jack DeBoer. Would not tell me that information. So I said, well, okay, they won't work with me. All I asked for was street and utility improvements. Because I looked and there's lots of utilities underneath that ground, a lot. And street improvements, that's all I wanted. Would not do that. So when I heard it was Jack DeBoer, I said, well, that's understandable. He had a track record, good guy. 8 months, 9 months later, maybe a year later, I'm talking to John Clevenger, who was president of Commerce Bank. And I told him my frustration of that area. I said, I'd like to move there. Had Tim Johnson at the Better Book Room wanted to move there too. He said, you know what? He said, I wanted to move there. I wanted Commerce Bank to be in the land essentially where the parking lot is now, the city's parking lot. And he wanted to walk way to the garage that is there now. And he said we would use that garage during the day. The hotel would use it at night, or Center 2 would use it at night. It'd be a perfect marriage. He said the city would not talk to me. They would not do it. I said, really? I said, same conversation I'm having, same time. He said, they never connected us. He says, yeah. He said, that's amazing. Why would they not do that? So I just want a little bit of history there. Maybe in future, let's try to bring people together instead of just put all the eggs in one basket. I'm over it. Things worked out fine. It's fine. But I will tell you that I do have, well, I'll save that for later. So that's it.
Councilmember Ballard.
Sorry, I didn't remove my name.
Councilmember Glasscock.
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor. I believe both of these conversations are tied. It's the same developer asking for this requirement that's been involved in the project from the start. So I do think the application before us and the conversation about the WaterWalk are tied in tandem together. I take some offense to one comment that a project won't happen without significant public help. That is significant public help. $43 million that have been spent on this property of public funds, I believe, is already significant public help, far more than the private investment that's up here. And I also take offense to, if you're asking for public funds, private transactions should be made public. So I know I'm not going to get an answer to this question based on that question too, but how much did Gosson Development get paid? WaterWalk LLC, Riverfront LLC, 4G LLC, because in 50 slides, we saw multiple transactions where they had development fees. Do we know how much the city paid each one of those entities during the course of this project that have already been paid out, and a lot of the same faces are still part of the development deal today?
So, based on our just cursory review of all of this, all of those soft costs, right? The design fees, all those were inclusive of these fees that you see in front of you today.
So they're included in the $43 million that we spent, all the money we spent to Gossan, WaterWalk, Riverfront, and 4G.
More specifically, when you kind of go back to sort of this slide from back in kind of late 2009, early 2010, right? That the general obligate, the $41.3 million went towards paying all of those. That, again, cursory view, that's what we found, right? Again, we still need to, if necessary, go and sit down with finance and work through old sort of archives of who got paid what, where, when, why, and how, et cetera. But our understanding at this point was that all of those the broker fees for the art, the design fees for Gossan were all included in this sort of $41.3 million number.
Okay. Two more quick questions. I think it was on page or slide 83, maybe? Go back to that. See if I wrote it down. Oh, nope, I did not write the right one. Maybe 93. Let's try 93. Nope, there's not one. Okay. Regarding the public investment was 41 million, or we spent 43 million. The original promised public investment was 41 million based on one of the last slides that I had seen. The original promised development was 80 million for the private investment, and up to this date, they had paid 36 million, correct?
Yeah, if you look back at the original development agreement, there was about $90 million, $86 million of private improvements and about $30 to $33 million of private improvements, so kind of 3 to 1-ish.
Okay. So 2 more questions, and then I would love to hear comments from the public too. Regarding, this is part of the East Bank TIF, correct?
Yes.
And so the East Bank TIF currently has about 4.6 million outstanding, is that correct?
That sounds about right. I know that in our recent conversations, we anticipate that the East Bank TIF district debt will be retired about 26, 27.
26,
So
27.
2 or 3 years from now, yes.
So when you and I think you and I talked, or Bob and I had discussed this during our meeting this week, regarding why isn't the applicant using maybe TIF eligible expenses, can you explain that more?
Yeah, so under the state tax increment financing laws, you have a 20-year window in which you can create a project plan. So if the district was created in 1995, in 2015, you can no longer create any new project plans. Subsequently, the plan for this specific area within the district, that 20-year plan has already run its course.
And when did it run its course?
2023? Yeah.
So
23, 24.
So a
It
project
just retired.
So a project just happens to be coming up asking for more incentives after a previous incentive expired just a year prior with little development over the last 20 years on the project, but then it's brought up a year after the TIF eligible project expired. Is that correct?
The redevelopment plan would have expired in 2023, 2024, yes.
So shortly right after.
We couldn't amend that, so I can't create any new plans, and the existing plan can't be amended, so TIF was not an option.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all the questions I have right now.
At this time, may I please have Ryan provide the slides regarding this project that is being considered?
Good afternoon. Ryan Clark, Senior Vice President of Development with the Annex Group, and I swear I won't have 55 slides, so we should be good. So yeah, as mentioned, we're the Annex Group. We're out of Indianapolis, Indiana. We are a Midwest-based developer, primarily focusing on pretty exclusively workforce housing. As mentioned, we have about 43 communities today, and really a heavy focus of amount of our project is really in Kansas, Iowa, and Nebraska, as well as Indiana, Michigan, and kind of those areas. In terms of Kansas, as mentioned, we have an existing project that is under construction right now, Union at Purple Heart. That's 250 units. Also a workforce housing project on the east side of town that should be opening up here in probably the next month or so on the first building. That is doing really well so far. We have almost the whole first building is already pre-leased. And so the demand has been really through the roof, over 900 inquiries so far on that project. Also wanted to mention, we do have a sister nonprofit called Impact Housing, where we provide services for our residents, kind of meeting the demand of what the need is in that location. Want to show kind of some recent infill projects that are currently under construction, kind of regionally. You'll see on the left-hand side, Union at Antelope Valley. That one just opened up in downtown Lincoln, Nebraska. So another urban infill project in a kind of a peer city. River's Edge, which is in downtown Des Moines. That's located right along the river. That will open up in October of this year. That's about 220 units or so. Another example in downtown Lincoln, small urban infill site utilizing a city parking garage as well on that project that's currently under construction. And then another example is a 250 unit project in Ann Arbor, Michigan for workforce housing, which was their first one in about 50 years. Do also want to mention utilizing the program that we kind of had previously discussed. We just broke ground in downtown Topeka for 250 units as well, and then have a project in Lawrence, Kansas also. As you'll hear, and obviously you've seen a lot of the different studies that you guys have done as a city in terms of the workforce housing demand, it's really through the roof here. A typical capture rate for us from our lenders, we need to be at about 10% of the available, residents that would be coming in. The capture rate for this project would be at 2.1%. So the need is really, pretty through the roof. As mentioned, we're in a unique opportunity here with KHRC, which is Kansas Housing, and kind of this last round of funding that makes a project like this feasible, kind of with some of the other things that we're talking about. So getting into the site specifically, if you'll see kind of in that black and white image there, that kind of shows in blue, kind of the massing of where our proposed site would be. So, right now we're proposing it's 186 units. It would be a 5-story elevator building. Would have about 60 or so parking spaces. And as Troy mentioned, we utilize some of the existing parking around for the remaining. All of our units, they come with, clubhouse, office area, on-site staff and management, fitness area. We'll have a green kind of central lawn out there with playgrounds and things in the middle of the building there in the green area. It's kind of a U-shaped. And then we'll be proposing on the 5th story, closest to the riverside, would be like a rooftop kind of outside area that is covered for residents enjoying and kind of the view. We specifically spent a lot of time on trying to design this to absolutely minimize any disruptions from the existing WaterWalk condominium complex that's to the east to preserve their view sheds into the river, and being cognizant of that. As a company, I would say we're kind of our niche is really focusing on urban infill housing, as some of the examples that I showed. So, obviously we just went through the long history of this site and why, and that's what excites us as a developer, and why we think this project will be very successful. It's the trails, it's the access to all the amenities kind of in the area, and hopefully with the history that's kind of been laid out in general, we're excited to have an arrangement that can bring a development like this to fruition. Next slide here. So this is more the rendering. So we did a night view and a daytime view to kind of show what that looks like. As long as on the top right kind of shows the massing again, next to the parking garage in the condo building and the old Gander Mountain site. So all high quality materials, brick and hardy siding. You can see in the in the middle there where the kind of rooftop deck area is. Units have balconies, really, construction cost and what code is today is, it's pretty indistinguishable from any, higher end market rate building for how it has to be designed in the energy efficiency of such units. So really, as I mentioned, we are our own property manager as well. We got our start kind of back in the day doing really student housing plays. It's a very intensive property management structure. And as we pivoted, more into workforce housing, we brought that, management aspect with us to be more, higher touch on these properties and be the manager of all our assets as these are long-term holds for us. At that time, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Ryan. I do maybe just have one question. Really, it's for the city manager. Is this the highest and best use for that property?
Mayor, that's a great question, and that's probably somewhat subjective. If you consider the original master plan, it's not consistent with that, so it doesn't have a retail or office component. If you look at today's market, you look at what's happening downtown, the need for housing, the need for affordable housing, I think it is an appropriate use on the site. Is it the highest and best use? That's really going to be hard to indicate. If we were to hold out longer, I can't judge the market in terms of what it would take in order for something closer to the master plan to be developed. But given the conversation, the history of this development, we're not going to be in for a significant dollar amount to assist with anything like that. So I do think, and I do believe the master plan anticipated, and previous discussions anticipated, an apartment use on a portion of the property. So in that regard, I'd say it is consistent with discussions that we've had, at least in the 16 years I've been here.
Ryan, one question for you. I remember this project, the Union at Purple Heart, which is in District Number 2, Councilmember Tuttle's district. And I think I may have asked the question, we would like to see more workforce housing in the city of Wichita. We've all talked about the need for housing all across the 6 districts. My question really is, have you considered other plots of land, or is this the only one that you considered because you were approached, or did you approach WaterWalk?
Yeah, I considered many different opportunities. There's a lot of different things that play in locations of what's called qualified census tracts and difficult to develop areas. It has to do with how the funding comes into play. But yeah, searched long and hard for potential opportunities. As I mentioned, we really like doing urban infill type of housing. So I sought this out. So as I did in a lot of the different cities, a lot of times, it's not even land that's available for sale. I just think, hey, this is from what I'm seeing and what the city's talking about, from what I'm doing kind of on my own independent research of what I think could be a great play. It's ultimately a lot of where I end up, selecting the locations. So, the downtown Topeka one, for example, was not a listed site. That was me kind of, proactively talking with the owner and finding that opportunity and matching it up with the city's goals. So this was all my doing of being like, hey, this area makes a ton of sense. Look at the amenities and some of the things that we've just got done talking about. And knowing there's a competitive scoring aspect to all this and having won several of these competitive applications before and knowing what works and what doesn't was how I ended up at this location.
And you also mentioned that the application process or the application deadline is this week.
Right.
And this is the last round of this type of tax credits that you could be eligible for.
Right.
My question to you then is, if you don't get these tax credits, will you move forward with this project?
No, there would be a fairly significant gap. Yeah, I wouldn't entertain it.
Thank you, Ryan. I see no further questions from the council. We will now open it up for public comment. All individuals are allowed 5 minutes per person, and you simply come forward, state your name and your address, and then the 5-minute clock will begin.
Celeste Rissette, Wichita, Kansas. I wasn't meaning to come here today, but I was watching this at home and got so upset at where we're at that here I am. Again, I applaud you all for the thoughtful questions. Thank you so much. And for talking about a failed development deal that has cost taxpayers $40 million with minimal private investment by the investors. It's a prime example of why we worked so hard on that bipartisan committee to try to come to you last Thursday and explain, stop these sweetheart deals, stop these no-bid contracts, stop these handouts of taxpayer incentives. And this is one of the prime examples of what has cost taxpayers in the city of Wichita. Here's what I want to say about it. And this is off the cuff, so excuse me if it's not a polished speech. Jack DeBoer took advantage of the city's naivety. He used a high-power law firm and an uninformed mayor, city council, city manager, and city law department to push through state and city funds into this 22-acre development. It was prime riverfront real estate. He got numerous incentives and economic development dollars, and there were various revisions, as you saw, and I've got all the copies of these deals in my office. They're about this thick. There's supposed to be 4 office buildings, high-end residential properties, a restaurant, and Gander Mountain was supposed to have a deck overlooking the river and a restaurant for the public to use. Jim Corrick also took advantage of the city's naivety, and he pushed through a change to one of our city's charter ordinance to get the funding for the Fairfield Inn in WaterWalk. And it's more than $2 million. It was $2.5 million for the hotel, and we're also being paid, or we're paying $1.5 million in interest. In fact, we've paid so little on that interest and that principal that we could almost save $700,000 next year if we just got rid of that debt for Jim Corrick. In fact, when it was booked on our books, they called it stormwater utilities, and the entries to pay off these payments was falsely labeled convention center project. And I believe there's no convention center in the Fairfield Hotel. So all of this was misguided, mislabeled, and misappropriated funds. And that was a charter ordinance. The hotel guest tax was created to take care of our tourism attractions, our public buildings, and Century 2. So for him to push through a charter ordinance change shows the influence these developers had on city council at that time. And it's so interesting now to see the names that signed this contract, including, and I'm going to call them out, Dave Wells and Dave Burke, who are now suing for the $2 million in the Kinmar unpaid development loan. They signed this deal, so for 20 years, we've been dealing with these same people, year after year after year, and they were given a no-bid contract to build WaterWalk, a no-bid contract, and that was one of the recommendations our bipartisan efficiency group made was stop these no-bid contracts. They're called design, build, construction, and that means the contract is handed to who they think the best builder is. So Key Construction got this contract, even though Dave Wells signed off on this agreement for WaterWalk. So this is so many convoluted influences in a contract that ends up costing the taxpayers so much money. I know it's a difficult situation because you're facing a deadline, but I would not do this. I'm sorry. I'll stand up here. I'll take the heat for saying this because I know we need affordable housing. But you have got to do whatever you can to get out of this bungled development deal. Fee simple, great suggestion, whatever we need to do. And you know what? If I was Jack DeBoer or if I was Jim Corrick and knew that I was getting this kind of publicity about having taken advantage of honest, hardworking Wichita taxpayers, I would work with the city to make this happen. So I challenge them. Jack DeBoer's estate, Jim Corrick, the developer, Dave Burke, Dave Wells, any influence they have, let's get out of this deal. Let's do fee simple so that if we want to do development, we actually benefit from it without any developer or any buyer or any residential condo owner having to negotiate through a stack of contracts involving CIDs, TIFs, star bonds, and all of the legal agreements. So please deny the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Celeste. I'm going to ask the city manager to address two things she mentioned. getting rid of that debt, specifically the $700,000 you mentioned. Can you address that? And then also regarding no bid contracts, design builds, what is the current policy from this bench?
Mayor, the first question, we have been looking at retiring that debt. Actually, our finance department looked at it earlier this year. It's not quite as simple as just simply retiring the debt and claiming all that money, because we do have to also look at what the time value of money is, what we would get for our investment of idle funds during that period of time. So then you take that and offset the debt service that you would avoid, and then you come up with an estimate. We think you still may have a savings, could be about $100,000, but we're looking at that with our financial consultant and bond counsel, and that may be rolled into an upcoming bond issue if that's the case. On the second item, council has a policy that's been adopted regarding design build projects, and there's a specific process that we have to follow. Bring it to the council. It has to be awarded on a competitive basis. A maximum price is adopted. I'm sure there's some other provisions and protections that we've built in there. I can't recall off the top of my head, but those are our projects. Again, Troy can correct me. I think the use of a contractor on WaterWalk was directed by the developer. Not quite sure what approval process was involved in all that. I don't believe that we were doing the selection, but when we use this tool, I think we have a pretty well-defined process that protects the city.
So since 20 years ago, do we no longer do things, especially when it comes to developer agreements, where all the rights go to that developer and the city has no clawbacks? Can you just address what has changed in 20 plus years and what steps are now being taken that won't get us into this same type of situation?
From an economic development standpoint, our policy has evolved significantly over the last 10 years especially. We're to the point now where almost every project that comes to the council has very little or no risk. We do a lot of pay-as-you-go. When we put TIF in front of the council, we do CID. The protections are that those are pay-as-you-go and that the developer absorbs that risk, not the city. And I think you all ask from the bench almost every project for us to affirm that, because that's the current policy that we have. If we look at a large project and compare this to another project the city was involved in, if you look at the K96 and Greenwich project, again, significant development. In that case, we have CID and star bonds used, and the CID, the first one that was put in place was with Cabela's, and that was to help finance interchange improvements that were needed to open up that development. The star bonds were used to pay for some basic infrastructure, the main roads into the development, and I think we may have had some general obligation bonds involved in the construction of the interchange as well. But then all of the support roads and the support network was put in by the developer. So I think that it's a good example of another way to do a project, and one that's much more, more recent, and one that has been extremely successful, to the point where we've retired our star bond debt early and the CID debt early. And that's a great example of leveraging private investment in order to be able to meet and actually exceed the city's obligation. In fact, I think we paid off the star bond debt 8 years early, and that will free up about $500,000 a year in sales tax revenue for the city annually as a result of that.
Thanks, City Manager. We'll continue with public comment.
Hello, I'm Kyle Rickliffs. I'm here to represent King of Freight. I'm an operations manager for King of Freight. King of Freight is the tenant in the old Gander Mountain building. We've been there since 2019. It's owned by a related entity, Always Holden LLC. I just wanted to give the city our perspective on things. I don't know if this is the right time for that or if this is something that needs to come later. I don't really know how any of this works. I saw the article yesterday. Relayed the info to my older brother, Mike, he's the 90% owner of King of Freight. We just wanted to make sure that the city was aware of our current situation. So our headquarters is in the WaterWalk. We employ over 650 employees. Right now, 475 of them are in the WaterWalk building. I think next week we'll have over 500 with our new training class. We're adding over 100 jobs next week across the U.S. We've got locations in Dallas, Little Rock, and Tampa, Florida, but Wichita will always be our home. We currently lease over 400 parking spaces from the city. This costs our employees and King of Freight $70,000 to $75,000 a year. I'm here because the proposed 186 unit development, at least according to the drawings in the article, shows around 70 parking spaces. So that means hundreds of additional cars competing for the same limited shared parking our employees rely on every day. We also employ 2 full-time security guards to patrol the area in addition to the city and the WaterWalk security. We're not here to oppose growth. We just want to make sure that this is planned responsibly, because existing businesses don't want to foot the bill or lose access to the resources that we already pay for. So WaterWalk parking is already shared with the public. Adding potentially hundreds of additional vehicles will overwhelm the system. King of Freight already leases 405 of these spaces, average about $6,250 a month, $6,250. This is a significant investment. It'll reduce availability. It harms our employees and our operations. We're urging the council to require adequate on-site parking proportional to the units to avoid burdening the existing tenants and businesses. According to the article, the developer is being offered a 76-year lease, $1 a year, full property tax exemption, sales tax breaks, while the existing WaterWalk businesses pay full freight, parking fees, property taxes, HOA dues without comparable incentives. This creates an uneven playing field and sets a precedent for future developments to rely on existing businesses' resources without fair contribution. The 186 apartments will increase traffic congestion in and out of the WaterWalk area. More residents and visitors with insufficient parking will increase street congestion and illegal parking. Increased density without proportional security measures risks higher crime rates, especially in shared garages and common areas. We've already been dealing with that quite a bit. The WaterWalk Owners Association, the resources, landscaping, maintenance, lighting, security will inevitably be strained. Without proportionate contributions from this project, costs will shift to existing owners and tenants. The WaterWalk was originally envisioned as a high-quality mixed-use destination. I really appreciate all the history you provided that helped open my eyes to a lot of things that I wasn't aware of. But we just think that a poorly planned high-density project with inadequate parking risks, eroding the district's brand, discouraging future business investment. We would like to urge the council to require a development plan that protects the value, safety, and functionality of the entire district. I understand this is under a tight deadline. I didn't even know much about this until a week ago. It would have been better to talk directly with the WaterWalk, but here we are now. So we were just hoping that maybe we could get more info, postpone this and figure out what we need to do about the parking situation, the safety, and hopefully this won't come at the expense of all the businesses that are already investing in downtown Wichita and creating jobs now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. And I think you spoke up in the middle of the presentation saying that you knew how much was paid for that property. I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that.
So I believe we inherited the lease for $1.
We can't. They inherited the lease for $1 is what he said.
I will have to confirm through my legal team.
He will have to confirm through his legal team, he said. Thank you very much. We will continue with public comment.
Hi, I'm Deb Foth. I live at Unit 503 at WaterWalk, and my husband is Kent Foth. And I know yesterday, and he's been quoted as, we were not opposing it. We like Jim. We like working with him. But does not mean that we support this project. There's a difference between not objecting and supporting it. We ourselves as residents have had to sue the developer. We did that in 2020. And so we know how hard it is to fight for the quality of our area, and that we had to do that to protect our own residents in our own parking area. And I would applaud what Celeste said, and I can imagine King of Freight's concern that there is not enough parking. And when we were first told about this, it was 100 parking spaces, and now it's 70 or 60. And you know that 186 apartments are going to bring a lot more people than parking available. So we need development, and to be honest with you, it's the most convoluted relationship that we have with the developer, the residents, and the city. And it's the most complicated system to work towards when there is an issue or a problem, and we've expressed some of those concerns before. So I would urge the council to look at ways that this can be gotten out of, that somehow the city has some more control over what happens in that area, because the route that we're on, it's not going to leave a good result. And as my husband said, the devil's in the details, the devil's who you know, and the devil who you don't know. And so a developer could come in and purchase that whole area and put up a family store or a dollar store or something that will not help attract the high quality of people that we want to come downtown and spend their dollars in Wichita. And frankly, we're at the forefront of entry into the city of Wichita. And I would hope that the city would want to invest the dollars and the time, in addition to all that you've done, I'm not minimizing that, to continue the quality development of the downtown riverfront area. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. We will continue with public comment.
Forgot to bring my reading glasses. I'm Allen Hill, 302 at WaterWalk Place. I mailed you all an email last night if you've had time to look at it or read it here, but I'll highlight part of that. I'm in 302 WaterWalk Place. My wife and I moved down here like 2011 or 12, and we had a 3-bedroom brick house out in northeast Wichita. And the first time I'd ever even thought about moving into an apartment or a condo, but my wife's health, we had to move. Anyway, somebody said, well, finally, as we looked all over town, try that place downtown. They got a big building and you can park right in front of your door. And I said, what? So anyway, we looked at it and moved in. And I just wanted to, I quoted this out of visitwichita.com, so even in one of your city websites that I emailed you, says, WaterWalk is a premier unit, multi-use development located in the heart of downtown Wichita. Luxury condos, offices, and a Marriott hotel anchor the development. Visitors and tenants can enjoy the tranquility offered in our beautiful courtyard, complete with walking paths, ponds, and a gazebo, all located within steps of Century 2. And concerts and shows over at Interest Bank is a short walk away. And I agree with that thing said about our place. But I also said, do not let this low-income building happen. Century 2 is only a block and a half away. The Hyatt Regency is just across the parking lot. Fairfield is only about 100 yards away. The King of Freight is less than that, and they pay big money to park right across the street, as he just gave the details. The building will only have well, I have down 100, like you said, and then just got through saying it's only going to be 60 or 70. And I told you they'd have to, if they're going to only have that many parking spots, the people that live there are going to have to get out and drive a block and a half up to, on Water Street to Waterman, hang right and get into the main street, another block, and then down another half a block to use what city spaces are in our WaterWalk Place, which is not going to be very convenient. So if you're going to build 186 units and you're only going to put 60 spots, That is insane. That's obviously not going to work, even if it was not with King of Freight being short of spaces already. And so anyway, when I look out the window, the only view we have in WaterWalk Place, if you haven't been in it, is west. To the east of us is the garage. And if you're on the end, north or south, then you got some side views. But so the only thing I can see is out west with the sunshine and sunrise. And now I'm going to be looking at a 6-story tall end of a building there hanging right in front of my deal. So I'll have to let me be able to see the sky. But we invested big money, and now we can see, if that happens, then my property value, I would assume, if somebody wants to buy it after this thing is built, I may be down $100,000, $200,000, which means you're going to be down the property tax. It's going to have to go down to match the value. If our property goes down, the city's going to be losing money. So anyway, as I said in my memo, please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. We'll continue with public comment.
Hello, my name is April Brooks. I work at King of Freight, been with them since 2017, and the move into the WaterWalk building. I kind of want to touch on some things that Kyle has already said, but I also want to bring to the forefront really how much that we're paying the city for this parking, and also highlight the fact that whenever this developer was up here talking, he was asked about parking questions. They said that they're going to have, 75 parking for the 186 units. He kind of brushed it off, and it was like, oh, they're going to find parking around the area. That parking around the area is the parking that our employees are utilizing currently and paying for. To date, we have paid $238,000 for the parking in and around that area. And as Kyle had mentioned, I believe our monthly invoice is about $6,500. As you can imagine, we also get complaints from our employees. They're not happy about their $15, which has also increased 2 times over the last year. And I think actually it's like $16.38. I would like the city to take that into consideration. While we're not opposed to the growth of the area, I think that it should be properly planned, and the residents that are currently there and utilizing the area to bring in 186 houses and to expect only 75 people to park there, that math is not mathing, as I would say. And really, that's all. I want to bring to light how much we're paying and understand King of Freight wasn't really mentioned in any of these presentations. We were briefly mentioned, and it was the old Gander Mountain building. We're not the old Gander Mountain building. We are King of Freight. I think we've paid over $1 million in property taxes on that building, and we pay a substantial amount to the city each month for parking. So really just want that noticed. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Brooks. We'll continue with public comment.
Good afternoon. Heather Schroeder, Executive Director of Downtown Wichita. And I'm not here to speak on the merits of any projects today. I just wanted to share our latest market research with you in regard to demand for housing downtown. As part of our ongoing effort to update the downtown master plan, we're calling it our Downtown Wichita Action Plan. It's the 10-year vision for how we want to see downtown grow as a community over the next decade. We commissioned an independent market research firm to give us updated data for our market in fall 2024. What they provided was that our market potential is to build up to 750 new housing units each year over the next 5 years for a total of up to 3,750 new units over that 5-year period. They looked at the population of people most likely to move downtown based on demographics, and they found that 43.4% of those potential downtown market movers earn 60% or less of the area median income annually. So our AMIs, our area median incomes at those levels would be $19,250 a year for a one-person household. At 50% AMI, it's $32,050 for a one-person household, and at 60% AMI, it's $38,450. If you were to work at our minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, you would only earn $15,080 annually. So you could not afford those units at 30% AMI, which I believe was the low threshold of this particular LIHTC project. I'm uncertain on what their percentage affordability rate is. So I just wanted to provide you with that information. We have strong demand at all income levels for housing downtown. Where that housing is sited and how it integrates into our urban fabric is a question to be determined by the community with our ongoing work on the Downtown Wichita Action Plan and with your input. Thank you.
Heather, I'll have one question for you. I asked this of the city manager. What's the highest and best use of this property according to the action plan so far?
That's a great question. This site abuts the river, and with all of our, I guess the larger WaterWalk site abuts the river. With every kind of topic area where we've surveyed the public at our community meetings, whether it's housing, working, entertainment, how people get around, daily amenities, everybody wants to see the river more active, more densely developed, kind of incorporating all of those various uses. So there is demand for housing along the river. There's demand for dining, making sure that people can, enjoy the river view. The river is unanimously stated to be our best asset, and very unique for a city of our size to have that amenity in our core.
Thank you, Heather. We'll continue with public comment. I see no one else from the public. Before we move on from public comment, thank you to the 6 speakers. City manager, actually, Jim, can you answer a specific question a resident had, which was condos and the views of their condos? In the WaterWalk agreement, does it say anything about what can or cannot be built in front of their condos?
Mayor, which agreement are you referring to?
With the WaterWalk condos. So are there any restrictions of what can be built in front of them in their agreement that I guess WaterWalk had with the condos?
Thank you for the clarification. To my knowledge, there are no written agreements that talk about obstruction of view.
Thank you, Jim. We will close public comment and now bring it back to the bench, and we have a full board. We'll begin with Councilmember Glasscock.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for Troy before I have any comments. So we have the proposal. A lot of what we talked about is history of it, but we have the green sheet, which talks about the specific proposal. When we look at what's before us today, what is the minimum that we have to include in the development agreement so they can attempt to get tax credits through the state?
So the way that the development agreement is constructed again today, right? Because they need to know sort of what some of the city commitments are, particularly in regards to the things like the property tax abatements and the sales tax exemptions, that letter of intent. That's why that's an exhibit in there. They need to know and understand that stuff. But what they need to be able to do is submit to the state the development agreement. So the reason why we drafted it the way we did was because we can continue to sort of hold the ground lease until such time as all of those preconditions are satisfied. That allows them to go do all of their due diligence, put their financing together, so on and so forth. If we don't have that contingency in place and we sort of just approve the development agreement and the ground lease, if for whatever reason they don't obtain the LIHTC tax credit award or they don't obtain the development rights or whatever, then there's really no way to unwind it, so to speak. So we've put that contingency out there that all the preconditions have to be met, and then we'll execute the ground lease to make sure that if for whatever reason they don't satisfy those preconditions, that this can get sort of unwound.
Probably not the exact answer I was looking for. So
Sorry.
do we have to offer the sales tax exemption, the property tax exemption? Right now, they request that they wanted to do a pilot to be able to pay for a portion of the property tax, and they want to not pay the property tax, or they want to fully pay the school district property tax. So what do we have to offer in an agreement to the state as part of a development agreement that the state would consider to award them LIHTC credits?
I'm going to answer that in a way of deferring to the developer because they'll explain more of the point structure.
Yeah, so it has to do with project feasibility, right? So, we talked about the TIF prior, that kind of expiring. We would have wanted to go that route, right? That would have been more simple. So this is a way to say, hey, we're still paying a certain amount of those taxes. This hits a certain debt coverage ratio. And so that's what our investors need to see, that is maintained throughout the life cycle of the project. And so there'll be underwriting standards that KHRC goes through. So this development agreement and kind of what we're talking about, with the sales tax exemption, with a pilot, that is for the underwriting of the project because our rents are fixed, right? We're straight across the board. You have tax credits coming in. And then so knowing what exactly our taxes are is what allows you to hit that debt coverage ratio. And that's the point of doing that, as well as showing the land control is another requirement.
So let's say this body chose to do sales tax exemption versus property tax exemption instead of doing both. Would you not be submitting the application if we chose to go one path over the other? Or do you require both to move forward with your submission?
For project feasibility, correct. It would be both, right?
And then question for Troy, because they're requesting 4%, how many have been awarded LIHTC credits in Wichita at the 4% rate?
And again, I don't have that information available to me.
Sally have that?
I can add one item on that, just knowing, so, we do what's called 4% projects, so these are the large ones. I believe she can speak to the 9%, but outside of our Purple Heart deal, I think there's been one other 4% project, but.
In the first round of 4% applications, there were no awards here in Wichita. There's been about 4% awards here in the past 7 years. One of them is a stalled project that isn't moving forward. The rest have actually moved forward. But as said previously, this will be the last round that includes the layering of the state tax credit on top of it.
So 8 out of how many?
Because they do urban and rural set-asides, that amount can vary. The first round, there were only 4 urban projects awarded, all in northeastern Kansas, and obviously none of those were ours.
So chances of even being awarded the 4% tax credits, pretty slim.
It is very,
Historically.
very, very competitive, and that's why hitting the maximum amount of points that you can on a project is pivotal. And so one of the scoring criteria in the QAP is your either below market loans and investments from your local government into the project.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ballard. Councilmember Tuttle.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a few comments, and I had lots of questions, but people got on the board before me, and that's okay. I just want to say thanks, Troy, for all of your work on this. I wanted to say thank you to all the speakers who were here today. I have had ex parte communication with the applicant. I've had ex parte communication with the residents, and then also with the businesses surrounding. So just want to make sure that's for the public record. This is a challenging one for me. It truly is, because we need workforce housing, and we know we need it downtown. These are the people who work in our restaurants. They, help with all of the new flourishing hotels that we have. They work in all of the new amenities that we're super excited about. And we know that we need all housing, and we need all housing not just in the downtown core, but all through the city. But I just keep asking myself if this is the right project at this time. There's lots of questions that need to be answered, obviously about the whole development, but specifically even about this project. It's, as mentioned, it's not consistent with any of the, I think, 5 master plans for this area. And I think this really highlights that we need to look at this area and, not just focus on the past. You need to keep, one eye in the rearview mirror, but most of your attention on the windshield. And I hope that, we've had a highlight today of what's happened in the past, but really be thinking as a community about our city's core and how we can continue to make it vibrant and address the growth and new additions that are coming in a really intentional and consistent way. Some of my concerns I mentioned are about parking. This is one of the lower return on investments that I've seen. I know it's 1 to 1.1 and, it meets the criteria, but it's razor thin. And with as many questions as we have, that's just something that worries me a little bit. I do want to thank all of the residents for sharing your thoughts. I received multiple emails, as I'm sure that my colleagues did. I had several phone calls as well. And it always is encouraging to me. I had my district advisory board last night, and we had a contentious zoning case, and 18 people came and spoke. And I said, I'm glad that people were here, and I'd be more worried if they weren't. So in this case as well, thank you to the residents who took their time to let us know how they feel. I just think there's too many unattended and unidentified consequences at this time. So this is going to be a really challenging vote for me. But thank you for Troy and for all your hard work on this. Appreciate hearing the other comments from my colleagues.
Councilmember Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Councilmember Tuttle. There's definitely a need for affordable housing in this community, including downtown. It's got to be all over the place. The unfortunate part of this is that this was so rushed to try and get this in under the deadline. I wish we would have had a little more time to kind of work this and understand the ins and outs of not only the history here, but also of the project. The parking issues, that is a concern as well. We got to make sure that we have adequate parking downtown, College Hill, all over the place. I wish you did have a little more time to kind of go back and forth and understand the scope of this project. And this is a difficult one. So thank you.
Vice Mayor Johnston.
Thank you, Mayor. When the city manager presented this to me, I don't know, 10 days ago or whatever, my initial reaction was, is this the right place for affordable housing? And I still struggle with that, question that. I'm all for affordable housing, working on it in many different facets, but I'm not sure this is the right place for it. I do appreciate the presentation Troy gave. I appreciate the history, interesting, good to know. So it's a tough vote, there's no doubt. So thank you.
Councilmember Glasscock.
Thank you, Mayor. Jim, I want to thank you for taking responsibility on behalf of the trust for a lot of the conversations. There are a lot of people who come before this body that don't take responsibility for previous things, and so I want to say thank you genuinely for that. I want to find a path forward to support in housing, whether that's affordable housing or housing, just housing in this area. But I don't know if I can support incentives on this location based on the history of incentives here previously. Not opposed to development of land, please do it. Not opposed to housing, please do it. Not opposed to the affordable housing unit, please do it. I know that's tougher economically to make feasible. And I want to see development. I just don't see comfortable, or I'm not comfortable with it in this location. Bob said something that stood out to me a second ago. He said that many of these deals happened because the council wanted to see development. And I don't want to, because the clock is ticking or because we want to see development, move forward with something that may not be the best use of taxpayer dollars. And so I won't be supportive of that, but I do hope, Jim, that we can maybe move forward with an agreement to have a new day on this development project in the future. And I think that that's something that this council supports. How can we move forward, and how can we press the restart button on WaterWalk? Because I think that we need to restart.
Councilmember Ballard.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to echo my colleagues and thank staff and Bob and everyone else that's been involved with this long and lengthy history. But I'll be voting no today because right now it's clear to me we need to have a lot more conversations with the parties that will be impacted. I'm not against the affordable housing project, but we need to look at the WaterWalk development overall and see what makes sense to fix this mistake. It's definitely not selling the land, but we can't keep doing the same thing because it's not working. I'd like to see us find a way to look at our riverfront property on how to make all of these areas work together as an exciting public asset along our river and not a developer's playground.
There's no one else on the board, and with that, I will add my final comments. From the very get-go, when I became mayor last year, I've asked about history being told to this community so we can have that conversation. But it's taken 1.5 years for that conversation, and now with a deadline in order for us to have the conversation. And so I'm very grateful to Assistant City Manager Troy, who dug up a lot of this history. I know it was not easy. There were a lot of development agreements. There were a lot of contracts, amendments. And I think one of the speakers, one of the residents actually said it best. I mean, it's so difficult to even just get an answer for a simple question because there are so many layers to it. So I also want to say thank you to Jim for, again, saying you apologize on the behalf of the estate. However, there were a lot of promises. It was not hopes. It was actually promises that were not kept. They were not fulfilled. And this community has been lied to many times. And that's why we cannot move forward until we've actually addressed all the ills. It's difficult for a new development to want to do good for our community to move forward with that idea. So I hope that in good faith, the state will come and speak with the city manager and the law team on how to move forward with not keeping us hostage on a 99-year deal. And I understand that that agreement was signed by individuals, again, who are not on this council, and by staff who's mostly not in the city of Wichita right now. So I'm asking in good faith, can we come back to the table? Because I know that this would require an agreement to be dissolved and a new one to come forward. So I'm asking in good faith, we need something to move forward. And I don't want the city to bear the brunt of what has happened in the last 20 plus years to happen again. And I would like to see development happen responsibly. I do believe that there is an opportunity with a $300 million investment in downtown Wichita through a new Wichita biomedical campus. There will be a need. There will be a need for housing. There will be a need for other amenities. But I ask that since you know there's going to be a need, can we come back to the table and do something that is right for this community? It really is difficult because Ryan, I know Annex Group is making a major investment in District Number 2 with affordable housing, workforce housing, especially for seniors. And I like that type of housing. I think it's important to have all types of housing in the city of Wichita. But I don't believe this is the right location. And so I ask, I know you're under the gun when it comes to time, but there are other plots of land, even in downtown Wichita right now, that would want to have that type of housing without the cloud, the negative cloud that currently sits on this specific property. So with that, I cannot move this motion forward. So I would move to deny this application.
Excuse me, Mayor, if I can recommend that the motion also include close the public hearing.
I move, Councilmember Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll take the minority position today. When we look at housing, all of us have talked about the importance of housing. And I understand the cloud that continues to be referenced here over this development. Mr. Korak was very brave and did the right thing in acknowledging that, apologizing, which we didn't ask him to do. Appreciate that. But that cloud is now potentially harming an opportunity for workforce housing. We've heard affordable housing, and I think there's even some type of connotation that has been alluded to with that. If we continue to say downtown is everybody's backyard, why not build housing for everyone? And just because workforce housing happens to be close to the river, I don't think that's a bad thing. That's a space where someone who makes what we make, 6 of us, I know the mayor makes double what we make, but someone who makes what we make could afford to live there. It's not paying $1,800, $2,000, however many dollars per month. This would be something that workforce folks can live in. The people who may work at the biomed space, the other people who may work downtown. It's not a bad thing to be there, and as the riverfront continues to develop, man, what a great space to have some affordable housing where people can live by these great amenities. And it's not just folks who are on the higher end of the wealth spectrum. So I am supportive of that. I think that everyone deserves to have an opportunity to live downtown, and as we continue to look at the numbers of necessary spaces, this puts more folks there. As we've talked to large chain grocery stores, we need more people downtown. We're still not there yet. This takes us one step further to get there. I understand the cloud. It's been apparent to me over my 8 years being on this body that we've learned a lot of lessons from deals that may not have been everyone's favorite back in the early 2000s. We do things differently. This is one of those opportunities to also do things differently. I do agree that we need to have a conversation on those other North 2 parcels to look at what can we do about this extended lease. But this opportunity right now, with this being the last year that the state is offering one of those opportunities to make this workforce housing happen, I think this is the right time to do so. You often want your habitable spaces to come online as something like biomed comes online. This would actually come online around that same time frame. And again, if downtown's everyone's backyard, and we continue to say that, and many of us have, and we continue to have other leaders in the city say it, then we have to act like it. When we have affordable housing opportunities, if the deal's not terrible, and I didn't hear that it was, and from what I've read, it's not terrible, then we should be trying to do what we can to make sure that there's affordable spaces for people. We know we're in a housing shortage. So for me, I know that there is a motion on the table. If it is seconded, I do have a substitute motion because I do think that this deal should happen.
Actually, it was not seconded yet.
I did. I seconded.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. So you have an amended motion that you would like to propose, Councilmember Johnson?
Yes, Mayor, I would like to offer a substitute motion to close the public hearing, approve the development agreement, and authorize the necessary signatures.
You have a substitute motion with no second. So that substitute motion fails. We're back to the original motion of denying or closing the public hearing and denying this project with a second by Vice Mayor Johnston. Any further comments? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll. Motion passes for the denial at 6-1. It is 12:50 at this moment. We will take a break. I will ask for a recess of 15 minutes, and we will return at 1:05.